So our speaker tonight is Tara Cohen, who is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, mindfulness instructor, and program manager with us at the Champlain Hospice Palliative Care Program. All right, thanks, Tara. Welcome.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks for inviting me to present tonight. And thank you, Ruth, for being here and helping me monitor, for monitoring the chat box for me and interacting with me as we go through the session. And thanks to everyone for spending your Wednesday night for the next hour and a half being here discussing honoring grief and supporting wellness, as human beings and in the roles that you play. So my hope for the session tonight is that it's as interactive as it can be, given the platform that we're on. Carl has explained that we're going to try something new today with hand raising and giving people the opportunity to try to share comments as we go, as well as using the chat box to make it interactive as it can be. So I was hoping that we could start before we really get into the heavy content. Hopefully it doesn't all feel heavy. I know grief at times can feel heavy, but my hope tonight is that we're able to discuss in a way that feels thoughtful, compassionate, and meaningful. But before we really get going, just taking a moment to sort of land where we are here today. I have no doubt you have come from busy days and probably a lot on your minds. So just taking a few minutes and getting comfortable in your chair. Maybe just noticing your body sitting here, doing a quick scan of your body from head to toes. Maybe just noticing your feet on the ground and closing your eyes if that feels comfortable to you. And when you're ready, maybe just becoming aware of the breath, breathing in, knowing that you're breathing in, and breathing out, knowing that you're breathing out. And if it feels comfortable to you, you could choose to say, breathing in, I calm my body. And breathing out, I calm my mind. Again, breathing in, I calm my body. And breathing out, I calm my mind. And taking a couple of more breaths here. Not needing to speed it up or slow it down, just allowing the breath to breathe itself. Whenever you're feeling ready, beginning to move your hands and feet, maybe heads side to side a little. And if your eyes are closed, reopening them, bringing your awareness back to the space whenever it feels okay. So I really like to start these sessions and exercises with really getting grounded and focused. And I think it's also a really useful skill when we talk about our own grief and supporting other people who are grieving, the ability to bring ourselves to the present moment, because it's very easy to get caught up in all of the things we've done throughout the day and worry about things that may still be coming. But as we're looking to care for ourselves and care for others, the more that we could bring our awareness and our presence to this moment, just being here, looking after ourselves and creating a safe space for the people that we're supporting, the more that we feel that we're really connected with that experience. So we have a few objectives for our time here together tonight. The first is to discuss some common language associated with loss, dying, and death. The second objective for today is really to enhance our ability to support ourselves when we're experiencing grief. And then the third objective is to increase our knowledge of how we could support others that we may be caring for in our organizations. So if it's residents or clients or patients. So here we're going to start with a quick exercise. We're going to play around with the chat box. So Ruth, getting ready. My hope is in the next 60 seconds that you're going to take the time to quickly type in as many euphemisms that you think of associated with dying and death. So euphemisms are things like kick the bucket, and I'll just give that one, and people are already going. You're off and running. 60
there you
seconds.
go.
Fabulous.
passed away, gone, they are gone, popped their clogs, crossed over,
Okay.
ceased to breathe, crossed over, passed away.
Okay.
Kissed
Yeah.
the dust in a better place, not for us. Back the farm, bought the farm, transition, bought the farm, passed away, left us.
Okay, for sure.
Starting over, way to heaven, starting a new life.
Okay, so that's great. Like in just like 60 seconds or less, I heard at least 15, 20 different different euphemisms. And the one that we hear, I think, most often when we're talking about dying and death is passed away.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
that
fly away.
Yeah, okay. I'm seeing a few others still, still a few more coming. So yeah,
Lost.
so I appreciate everyone sharing the ones that come to their mind. And I think the thing about euphemisms, typically they're used to lighten up a conversation or lighten up a topic that we feel difficult, right? Something that we're not comfortable talking about, things that are challenging. And I don't mean to say that it's wrong to use this language, but my hope is that we can at least be reflective as we think about the language that we're using. So I know when I'm supporting people around illness, dying, and death, and euphemisms come up, I'm always sort of attentive to the language that feels comfortable to them, because my hope is not to push people in a way that feels uncomfortable. But I also think that the more we could start to integrate the actual language, I think about Brene Brown quite a bit. She has this line that clear is kind, and euphemisms are not always clear, right? Especially if we think about supporting children around dying and death. This idea of lost or gone to sleep. Kids are in particular really literal, but even for adults, some of this language is not, it's not being clear. So again, just thinking about the language we use and starting to promote using language like dying and died and death, where it feels okay and it feels comfortable, will change the culture that we have in our society, right? And starts to, if we could be comfortable with it, we could help other people be comfortable with it as well. So just something to think about when we talk about the language we use. I wanted to spend not too much time, but a little bit of time talking about some of the definitions around grief. So if you hear, the first is grief itself. So when I think about grief, the things that I think about are, that grief is not itself just a simple emotion. Grief is made up of many different experiences. When we are experiencing grief, it changes the way that, we feel emotionally, socially, physically, spiritually, sexually. It changes our behaviors, it changes our cognition. So grief is a very wide, all-encompassing experience. And also the Latin root is gravis, which means heavy, right? So I love that. It makes such sense if we think about ourselves when we've had experiences of grief. Very often just that sense of heavy is what we feel, the weight of the world on our shoulders. We don't want to get up or get out of bed, just the sense of physical heaviness and emotional heaviness. So that's, when we talk about grief, we're sort of talking about this larger experience and all the different ways that grief impacts us. Anticipatory grief, really what it sounds like, right? We are anticipating a loss. So we see that very often. I think, for those of you who are working in long-term care, there's a lot of anticipatory grief that happens as people move into long-term care, because they may be leaving homes that they don't want to leave. There may be a sense of loss of independence. Maybe some physical losses due to illness, all these different changes, right? And they might be thinking ahead. There may be a sense, either the individuals themselves or family members, starting to anticipate a time where the illness becomes more challenging, and then end of life and dying. So it really is that piece of anticipating what's to come. Disenfranchised grief is something that I talk a lot about with my long-term care colleagues, because disenfranchised grief is really a failure a failure of others to acknowledge our grief. And how I see that showing up for long-term care team members and team members in other healthcare settings as well, is it sort of bumps up against our sense of professionalism. So as people working in healthcare environments, sometimes we feel like we're not entitled to our experience of grief, and maybe other people feel that as well. You know, that we have chosen, or they have chosen, to be in these roles, so we're not allowed to feel sad or feel, you know, anything else that we're experiencing as a result of grieving. And sometimes there's a sense of shame or embarrassment. I'm not being professional enough. I'm not, you know, or feeling like it's indulgent. Maybe I didn't know this person this long, so how am I entitled to feel grief? I'm not family. So the sense of it being disenfranchised, and we know that when disenfranchised grief happens, it really contributes to a sense of like loneliness, isolation, sometimes burnout for team members. So what, you know, one of the things that we could do to address our disenfranchised grief is really open up these conversations in our healthcare environments, right? To take the time to acknowledge and normalize this experience of feeling grief as a result of people that we're supporting dying. Complicated grief is the next one, and complicated grief, you know, the way I like to think about complicated grief is sometimes it's a result of multiple things happening at one time. So a person might experience the death of someone close to them, or the death of someone in their lives, and it becomes complicated because of other factors that they have going on in their lives at the time. So it could be a substance use issue, it could be some mental health issues, it could be compounded grief because there have been repeated losses that have not really been integrated. And people will ask me, like, what does complicated grief look like? And I think my best way of sort of describing is that it doesn't look like one particular thing, but typically in grief, what we see is that there's movement. Things don't stay the same, right? So I don't put any specific timeline on grief. It's not that you should be at this place at this time or should be in that place, but there is a sense of it being dynamic and things are moving. So often a complicated grief, it's a sense of being stuck. So there isn't that same movement. Mourning, we talk about mourning being the public face of grief. So mourning is, you know, the way that we bring our grief out into the world. So that could be in ceremonies and rituals. It could be in memorials. It could be in the clothing that we wear to let others know that we're going through a time of grief. And what I've learned about mourning that I didn't really know, and I think it's interesting, like for, you know, some people are intensely private and some people are, you know, more public about their experiences. You know, through some of the research and the articles, is that there's a lot that we could be gained when we go through mourning, because it allows others to see us, right? And sometimes that's what we really need in our grief is, you know, not that we need to have a big sign on our heads, but at the same time, having our grief seen, acknowledged, and supported really can help. So it made me think about this period of mourning a little bit differently. And then finally, the last one, bereavement. Bereavement really is grief and mourning. It's an encompassing term that includes both the internal experience, which is grief, and the external experience of mourning. So when we talk about a person is bereaved, it's sort of just indicating that they are, you know, that both grief and mourning are existing at the time. So that was a lot of information. So I see that there's a question there, Ruth, in the chat box.
So someone's asking, is grief only about death or other losses too?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're tending to focus on grief today in terms of dying and death. But yeah, we feel grief for many different reasons, right? Like the first ones that come to mind in our society, divorce. You know, it could be moving, you know, leaving your home country. It could be, you know, a parent who's incarcerated. You know, yeah, we feel grief, you know, again, it's like this physical, social, emotional, spiritual experience that we have. And we know that we have these experiences as a result of many different life transitions and changes. It could be retiring, getting a new job,
Moving into long-term care.
moving into long-term care for sure. So yeah, so thanks for asking about that. Yeah, so this is a new image that I found online. I used to have a different one, but I just found this one and I really like it. So you know, the top part of the image is saying what we think grief looks like. So I think for many of us, we sort of grew up in the time of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. There were the 5 stages, right, that are listed there: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And while Kubler-Ross's work was amazing and groundbreaking, what we do know is that her stages were intended really as the stages people go through when they're dying themselves, but the work was kind of extrapolated into being misunderstood as these are the stages of grief that all people go through. So really what we know now over the years through research and experience is that there are no 5 specific stages that people experience as grief. There is no timeline on these stages. Really what it looks like is the second diagram. There's a whole bunch of craziness, whole bunch of stuff happening, all mishmashed. It's not linear. We don't start at point A and go to point B or Z or whatever. Grief is really just kind of all over the place, right? So if you see like intensity and time on this diagram, it's not like we started one's intensity and it's this nice slow sort of, you know, slide out of grief. You know, we could have a day where we feel like we're really overwhelmed, and the next day we're feeling like, oh, okay, I kind of feeling together today, and then bang, everything goes crazy, right? So the term that I really like that's in the literature are grief bursts. So a grief burst could come and wash over us at any moment. And what I like to say to, you know, when I'm supporting people who are experiencing grief or I'm going through my own grief, is the reminder not to have any expectations. The more we could let go of our expectations and just be with whatever it is that's showing up, the more that we're able to sort of just let that be what it is. So I hope that helps. You know, if we expect it to be messy and it's messy, maybe we can meet that in a more comfortable way and not push it away or think there's something wrong with us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I believe we have a poll here. I think that's why, Carl, you've shown up. So I have a question for everyone. When I am experiencing grief, I prefer to. So if you would just choose, you know, and I think in this one, you could probably pick multiple ones. Is that true, Carl?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can pick multiple if you want, or
Yeah, because we know that, you know, as human beings, we have different strategies that we use when, you know, when we have things going on, when we're experiencing stress or grief. So feel free to pick as many or as few or as many as you want.
that sounds good. It looks like about 60% of people have voted so far, so I'll just leave it open for a few more moments.
Okay.
Great. This is really cool.
And I feel that there's, yeah, we'll just give it another few seconds. And I see, Jeanette, that you made a comment in the chat box. Yeah, and Ruth has answered. So yeah, grief has no time frame. It's forever. And I love that, right? Thanks for pointing that out. And I think, you know, sometimes when we have learned, you know, this idea that there is a time frame and we put that on other people, that really creates challenges for them, right? Because they start to wonder if they're not doing grief properly. So I love this idea that, you know, there's no particular time frame. You are where you are, and that's okay.
Yeah. One person says moment to moment in grief when it needs varies so much.
Absolutely love that. So how are we doing there, Carl? Do we have
yeah, we're all good. So I'm going to share the results. So everyone, it should pop up on your device. If it doesn't, don't worry. I'll read it out to everyone. So people watching the recording get a sense of it too, because they won't have that pop-up screen of the recording. So it looks like 66% of people. So the most common answer is actually be alone. And the second most common is at 61% is talk to a friend. 20% say do something creative, 49% do a physical activity, and 20% something else, which you can write in the chat what that something else is if you like to.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I love it, right? The whole point of doing this is just to start to get a recognition. Again, there's no right or wrong. We are all different. We all need different things. And to think about, like, you know, on two levels. One, when you're experiencing grief, some of the things that feel supportive to you, to, you know, be mindful about it. Sometimes when we're really feeling like we're struggling or we're low, it's hard to remember what it is that feels supportive. So maybe having a sense of that in a moment when you're feeling better, knowing what some of your go-tos are. But also, if we think about the workplace and our colleagues and teammates, you know, if we could get to know maybe the people we work closely with and have a sense of what they, you know, what helps them feel supported, it gives us an opportunity to check in, right? If you know that your friend, you know, does like to talk, just checking in and saying, you know, I'd love to go for a walk or have a chat. Is that something that would feel good to you right now? Or
Mhm. One person said they cry.
okay,
Jennifer's let us know that she's grieving right now. She's lost her sister-in-law, and she takes it one day at a time.
okay. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. Yeah, one day at a time, exactly. Just whatever shows up on that day. And it's one of the questions that I often ask, you know, the team, like healthcare team members I'm working with, or the clients I support who are grieving, is what do you need in this moment, right?
Yeah.
Just this moment. And sometimes people know, sometimes they don't know, and that's okay. But it's a question that, you know, the more that you get comfortable thinking about what you need, the more it might start to become clear. So. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for that. So this is another question that I was curious about. My colleague Pam, who's a social work professor at Carleton, sort of brought this to my attention years ago, and it's a question we've been asking of healthcare team members for a while. Is really, what are your warning signs? So if you think about a time when you were experiencing grief, did you have any particular warning signs show up? You know, that you could sort of think of and be aware of, that told you you needed to care for yourself either more or differently. So for example, my colleague Pam, she always shared that she would end up at Bulk Barn. She was at Bulk Barn buying the baggies of goodies. For me, I know it's Netflix. I go from my regular Netflix usage to something really ridiculous where Netflix is always asking, are you still watching? Are you still watching?
Yeah, sleeping too much, loss of appetite, not eating at all.
Okay.
Someone says they go for a massage
Okay.
and not sleeping, restless nights.
Yeah, sleep seems like one of those things. Hey, it's a real warning sign.
Yeah.
Okay.
Music, crying, lack of sleep, more lack of sleep. I'm feeling disorganized.
Okay.
Difficult to concentrate, not sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah. I eat too many cookies.
A little comfort eating. Okay.
Yeah. I would be silent. Hard to have energy to talk to people. Hard to come back to work. I have uncontrolled emotions, crying for no reason.
Okay.
Just staring at the wall.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for sharing some of those, right? And we're just normalizing that these things happen and there's nothing wrong with us. This is, you know, these are ways that if we're more mindful, we'll talk about mindfulness a little bit more later on, but like just starting to be able to notice when these things come up, right? Because if we're on autopilot, which can really happen very easily in our experience of grief, we're just kind of trudging through, not really thinking about it, just, you know, just trying to get through the days. We might not know how to care for ourselves as much. So the warning signs are there if we notice them, and then remember to check in and take care of ourselves. I put this in, this is also kind of new that like I don't know if the image is new, it's new to me, but I thought it's, you know, sometimes in our grief, you know, especially if we've been grieving a lot, and I was thinking about in terms of the pandemic, right? So there was so much sickness and dying in long-term care. and lots of grief, right? Like
Mm.
only from the dying, there's grief from all of the change in patterns and the isolation and having to keep people apart and families not being able to come in and all of the different things that were happening. So I thought this was an interesting image, take a few minutes to look at the different stages and have a sense, again, I'm not a huge proponent of stage theories, but I think there's something about this that if you see yourself reflected in any of these particular places, from the beginning, if you feel a strong need to prove yourself, that later turns into, like you withdrawing from your social life to getting to a place where you feel really depressed, lost, completely exhausted. It's time for, additional reflection, right? Is what's coming up? Is this an intense experience of compounded or complicated grief? And really like having the awareness and then the capacity to support yourself so you don't get to stage 12 where you are in full on burnout. We'd like to be able to support, for you to support yourself and for your teammates to support you before you get to that place. So we're going to start to reflect a little bit at this point on emotions, right? So if we start to look, so that was kind of the background, the foundational pieces of grief. I guess the one other thing that I wanted to throw in there, and some of these foundational things that I think of when I'm thinking about grief is that grief takes energy, right? So if you're feeling tired, it's not necessarily burnout. It might just be the experience of grief, right? But I think that's important to just, to bring up, is that grief requires a lot of energy, right? It takes physical energy, it takes emotional energy.
And being in the presence of grief, I think, takes energy out of you.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Ruth. That's true, right? When you're holding space for other people's grief, also, it does take energy.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring it up is so you can remember to slow down, lower the expectations you place on yourself. It's not a matter. I often hear healthcare team members saying, like, I should do this, I should feel better, I should be working harder, let's try to drop the shoulds as much as we can. And, there are things obviously that need doing, but at the same time, wherever you could build in some space to allow for that, building up the reserves, right? Because your energy is being depleted is really important. Okay. So feel free, if you have any thoughts or questions, continue to throw things in the chat box. Ruth is going to be watching, but I'm sort of going to shift gears a little bit to really focus on, at this point, like ways that you could support yourself while you're grieving. So the first thing that I wanted to discuss was becoming aware of our emotions, right? So I think a lot of people struggle to be able to name their emotions. And I was at a time in my life, maybe 7-8 years ago, where I used to joke that I needed one of those preschooler charts with the faces and the labels to know what I was feeling. And when I started to joke with people about that, they also shared that they felt the same way. So I don't think I was alone in it. And turns out there are really good resources out there to help people learn to like label their emotions. So this is one. This is called Plutchik's Flower. So Plutchik was a psychologist, Robert Plutchik. So it's Plutchik, if you're interested. And this is just one of many different emotion wheels that people can use because sometimes having the labels right in front of you helps you recognize what emotion is coming up. So what I particularly like about this wheel, this emotion wheel, is that if you look at each flower petal, it has the same emotion with increasing and decreasing intensity. So if we were to take the blue one, for example, the primary emotion would be sadness. So it's not the inner circle, it's the first ring out is the primary emotion. So you'll see again, sadness. And if you go towards the center, the emotion of increased intensity is grief. And the emotion with lesser intensity is pensiveness. Yeah. So if you Google Plutchik, there's this wheel, and you could find, there's a website that has all sorts of videos that go with the emotions that you could click on. You could learn about that specific emotion. But I think the more we could build up our capacity to name our emotions, it could really help support our well-being. So thanks for adding that, Ruth. So Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. Thank you. So Dan Siegel's a psychiatrist, and he has this expression, name it to tame it. So in his research, he has learned and he has shared that just by naming the emotion out loud, I feel lonely, I feel heartbroken, I feel frustrated, just putting it out into the world, walking around and saying it, it reduces the hold our emotions have on us. So I think that's a really interesting experiment, right? So next time you're feeling something and you're not sure what it is, maybe sitting with it, pulling out one of these emotion wheels or Plutchik's wheel, seeing if something resonates, and then just saying it out into just putting it out into the world, and just watching what happens 3 minutes later, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Someone said to sit with it without judgment.
I love that. The non-judgmental, right? So again, we're going to talk about mindfulness, which is more non-judgment, like not having judgment. So I appreciate you sharing that. Absolutely. Not judging it, right? It just is what it is. And that brings up another point that I think about when I started thinking about and learning about emotions, like this language we use around positive and negative emotions. So I've really worked hard to, like, myself personally and to share with others. It's not that our emotions are inherently negative or positive. I think they're ones that we like to feel and ones we don't like to feel, but they are all equally legitimate, right? So allowing them all to come up, allowing ourselves to be with them, trying not to resist them or be angry at them or judge them. The emotion just is what it is. So yeah, sitting with it without judgment and seeing what happens.
I had a patient one time tell me that she was angry about being angry, and it made her more angry.
Absolutely, right? Like it's compounded that way, right? Our
Yeah.
feelings about our feelings could really increase a feeling. So yeah, all these different layers. So this is an exercise. This is Tara Brock, who's a mindfulness teacher. Yeah. So the acronym is RAIN. So the R is for recognize. So just recognizing the difficult emotion, noticing what's coming up, naming it again, like, Dan Siegel says, this is sadness, this is anxiety, just naming it. The A is allow, right? So again, without judgment, allowing it to be there, not pushing it away, not resisting it, just allowing it to exist as it does. The I is to investigate the emotion in the body. So just turning, as we did at the beginning, just starting to notice what's happening in your body, doing a quick scan. And I also, Dan Siegel talks about emotions are just labels we put on a bunch of body sensations. So we say we're angry, but what does angry really mean? Does it mean we're clenching our teeth and our fists are in balls? These are labels we use to be able to express to ourselves and to others what's happening. So investigate what's happening in your body. And then the N is for nurture. So offering some of those sensations, kindness and compassion, right? Can we hold that emotion? Can we hold the experiences our body's happening, that the experience is happening in our body in a more gentle and loving way? And if we do, how does that shift the experience of it? Yeah. So self-compassion. And there's a lot of research and a lot of work in self-compassion. These last, 10, 15 years, I would say, in North America. I think we hear a lot from Kristen Neff, NEFF, and Christopher Germer. They do a lot of work together, a lot of research in self-compassion. There's also Paul Gilbert from the UK who does a lot of self-compassion work. But Neff and Germer, they talk about these 3 different elements of self-compassion. And why do I bring self-compassion up in a discussion about grief? I think, what I'm seeing in the work I do with healthcare teams and the work I do with individuals, that self-compassion is a really resourceful way to support ourselves when we're experiencing all that we experience in grief, right? So it could be some of the emotions that we might feel, regret or guilt, or it could be some of the physical sensations. It could be some of the questioning, some of the existential things that are coming up, fears, worries. What is this all about? Self-compassion offers a lot as a way to support ourselves and help support others when grief is present. So they say the three different elements of self-compassion are mindfulness, self-kindness. It's supposed to be common humanity, but we have community humanity. So I apologize for the typo there. It's supposed to be common humanity. So if we look at the first one, being mindfulness, there's a lot of talk about mindfulness. You know, I don't know if it's something that feels familiar to people. I sometimes hear people say like, oh, it's too airy-fairy for me, or I can't sit there all zen, or but really when I think about mindfulness, what I think about is noticing. So the definition of mindfulness that I really like is Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition. Jon Kabat-Zinn started the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. It's also called MBSR. And he was at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and he was supporting people who were living with chronic pain, and they had been, through all of the medical treatments that, that were offered to them, but still experiencing high levels of chronic pain. So he started using mindfulness as a way of supporting them to live with their pain. And his definition is that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in a particular way, moment by moment, non-judgmentally. Right? So just paying attention on purpose. And why do we do that? The reason we do that is because if we can recognize what is happening, we could build a pause in where we could care for, where we could see what's happening, we could notice it, and then we could respond to ourselves differently. So, if we think about typically in our lives, there's some sort of stimulus, something happens. It could be, somebody dies at work, when someone we're caring for, and we have an immediate reaction, right? Like stimulus reaction. We sometimes go into autopilot and we just do what we know, we do what we've done before, we do what we've seen. But mindfulness gives us that opportunity again to sort of like notice everything that's coming up in our body, our emotions, our sensations, our thoughts, and then like ask that question, what do I need right now? Right.
So Tara, somebody said that they remember feeling so shocked when one of their residents that they worked with died, even though she was 96. Why does it still feel so shocking to me when somebody dies in long-term care, even if it's expected?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So, and that, like, for me, like my first thing when I read that is like, you have to honor that, right? Like shock is what came up. You weren't, even like maybe intellectually there's an understanding of that, but the experience was like, oh, wow. I feel so surprised and shocked about this. So noticing how that impacts you, right? And I'm curious if the person wants to elaborate, right? How do you care for yourself when you notice that happening? But yeah, I appreciate that sharing. Yeah. So in the second piece of self-compassion is the idea of being kind to ourselves. And there's no tougher group than healthcare workers who care so beautifully for everyone else, but struggle to be kind to themselves. I find it, I don't find it like strange. I just find it fascinating how it comes so easily to care for others, but like the expectations we place on ourselves are so different, right? So the suggestion is, to be self-compassionate, can we speak to ourselves the same way we would speak to our best friend or someone we love? So I'm wondering here, this is an activity called the 6-word story. And it's a really, it's obviously not a work of literary genius in 6 words, but what it really is a brief exercise that you could write down and stick in your pocket or put on your bulletin board or have it somewhere, that when you are struggling, to be kind to yourself, when you recognize that you have unrealistic expectations or shoulds or demands you're putting on yourself, here's a reminder in 6 words of what you will do to support yourself when you are struggling.
Mm.
We have people who are interested. Feel free to put your 6-word story in the chat box. It could be something like sit by the fire and drink tea.
Mm.
It could be
Right.
take the dog for a long walk. Uh-oh, my dog just looked at me. He heard the W word. So yeah, if something comes to mind, feel free to share it in the chat box, because you might be sharing, a story that will help out some of your colleagues here tonight. Things, different strategies that we all could use when we're struggling, because we all go there at times, right? We're all working to continually build up our repertoire of things that feel supportive when we feel, when we feel grief, or when we feel struggling in other ways too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What do you
people are
think?
saying a little prayer, praying and meditating, calling a friend. Yeah. And someone said, this a death happened to me just last week, and I still felt very emotional.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think we're human, eh, Tara? We're all human.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hope, like, again, we talk about judgment, right? So not judging that.
Yeah.
It's just, it is what it is, right? You still feel emotional, and that's okay.
Stop, breathe, slowly eat chocolate without guilt.
Mm.
Listen to something uplifting. These
Beautiful.
are all great ideas. Yeah. Journaling, documenting is very powerful. Lighting a candle, writing words that come up to my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carl, we need to keep these and start a book. We need a book that we could share with everyone.
I try to say it out loud to somebody, then it becomes real.
Okay, beautiful.
I ride my motorbike. I light a candle.
Okay.
I lit a candle for you tonight, Tara.
Thank you. Oh, I love it. Thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Not being okay is just fine.
I like that too. Not being okay, right? Again, like shifting those expectations. It's okay to not be okay. We're going to talk about Megan Devine's book. We have her video. That's the line she uses, which is
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing those 6-word stories. It's really nice to see what comes up for other people to help us build up our, our ideas and our resources as well. And this last one, so this idea of common humanity, it's one that I love when I think about self-compassion, right? So sometimes we feel so alienated and lonely in our grief, right? I'm the only one who feels this way, or why me? And it could be really supportive to know that we're not alone. So this picture is actually a marble that my mom gave me. It's from the 40s. I really love it. It's just in my bookshelf here next to me. And particularly early in the pandemic, when we were sent home to work, but many of our colleagues were on the front lines and still going to work every day. And I felt really sort of disconnected, and some of the guilt for not being able to be there and help, and just feeling safe in my home, and just feeling like, again, I guess disconnected and apart from people that I was thinking about and worrying about. This idea of common humanity was really something that I turned to a lot. I would take the marble out and roll it in my hands. And just think like, I am not the only one feeling this way right now. We are all together in this. We are all going through something really challenging right now. So yeah, so I don't know if other people have touchstones that will,
Mhm.
ground them in the sense of that we are just, little bits on this big planet of people who are experiencing the struggle of being human. Yeah, and I guess the other thing that comes up for me here is that I did a course called Mindfulness Informed End of Life Care at the University of Toronto. And the woman who founded the program and runs the program, her name is Michelle Chaban. And she would start all of these sessions that we would do together, and other sessions she did out in the community by asking people who here has not suffered.
Mm.
There was like never a hand that went up, right? And to me, that was a real sense of common humanity. So,
Mhm.
sometimes there was similar suffering, sometimes there was different suffering, but just by virtue of being human beings on the planet, we are all having different, we are having the shared experience of suffering. And that's
Mhm.
okay, right? Like it feels really supportive to know we are not alone in that. So
Mhm.
common humanity. Yeah. Ruth, was there anything in the chat box that we should be going back to or?
Well, someone said prayer. They find themselves doing more prayer when they're in struggle and strife. And yeah, sometimes when we share that we're struggling with grief, it allows others to share as well. And people are often shocked because you kind of look together, but we're kind of all in this together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great reminder, right? Just because we're like, we're pulling off on the outside doesn't mean that it's not all existing under the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else or are we?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth. So yeah, so those were just some of the things that, we thought would be helpful to share in terms of like our own internal experience of grief and how we support ourselves. And again, the common humanity sort of is helping us shift gears into supporting one another, which is kind of where we're headed in this next section together. So we have another poll for you, another question, wondering about how comfortable you are discussing
Oh.
dying and death with others.
Mm.
So again, no right or wrong here. Everybody's where they are. And that usually is as a result of the experiences we've had growing up, what we've learned. So yeah, if you're feeling comfortable, it's anonymous, just having a sense of how many people are not at all comfortable, how many people are moderately, and how many people feel completely comfortable.
We'll just leave it open for another moment here. It looks like most people have answered though.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got the results shared there. So most people, 58% of people say moderately, 42% say completely, and 0% said not at all.
Okay. Okay. So we have a pretty yeah, I don't often see 0, but you are here today. So that is a sign that you're willing to engage in these conversations. So, okay. So 58 moderately and 42 say completely. Okay. Thank you for that. I really appreciate hearing that. And this is interesting, right? Just to have a sense, here today, but in life in general, that we're going to encounter each of these types of people, right? Some people who are not at all comfortable to people who are completely comfortable. What this brings up for me, again, going back to that program in mindfulness informed end of life care, is the idea that we learned early on about this idea of our death thought systems. So death thought systems, it was an article by Robert Kastenbaum. He talks about death systems, which sort of is a reflection on that we have all come from a set of beliefs, right? We all come with a set of beliefs that emerge from our families, our communities. So he says that these things are often formed early in our life around our first experiences of dying and death. Our beliefs come to be as a result of things we are explicitly told, like don't cry or be quiet, or we don't talk about those things. or things that we just implicitly absorb, things we observe. Often we are young and we observe adults behaving in a certain way, and we think, oh, okay, this is how we're supposed to do things. And from that, we often emerge in one of these categories or somewhere along this range of not being comfortable or somewhat comfortable or completely comfortable based on what we've seen and how we've participated in dying and death in our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of cultural stuff, right, that comes up in that. And I think in the workplace, we have to be aware of all of this, right? And it's not that one way of doing things is better than another way of doing things, but how can we support each other, knowing that this is the reality. So for me, like, a lot of it is about having these conversations. If I could get all long-term care homes and healthcare organizations having conversations about what their death, what the individual team members' death thought systems are and sharing them, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Be really valuable, especially because as you're supporting other people, your team members, but also people in the home who are dying, we have to be really careful to be aware of, our belief systems and not put them on other people, right? So,
Cultural humility.
Yes, thank you, Ruth. Cultural humility, absolutely. And not saying we need to know the answer, but we need to know how to ask the questions, right? So what was your experience around dying and death? What do you believe to be true? What's important to you? How do you want to experience these things? What feels okay? What doesn't feel okay? Yeah, it's really talking about it. Talking is important. I see. Thank you, Barbara, for sure. And not being afraid to have the conversations where appropriate. So speaking of having conversations, here we go. So this is where we are hoping, if you feel like raising your hand, Carl's going to do his best to unmute you, and we will see if we can make this work smoothly. We're talking about communication, and I think we have all had the opportunity when we are experiencing grief to be supported, sometimes by people who know exactly what to say, and sometimes by some really well-meaning people who say things that are meaning to be supportive, but really miss the mark, and it does not feel supportive. So I think we're going to start with that one. So does anybody want to share something that was said to you that felt unhelpful or hurtful, even if it was well-intended? Mm-hmm. So you could write it in the chat, or you could raise your hand and Carl will try to unmute you.
Yeah. And you can either raise your hand, or if you're having difficulty finding that, you can write in your chat that you wanted to raise your hand. Sometimes it's tough on different devices. All right. I see one person, Alia.
Alia. Mm-hmm.
Raised their hand.
Good for you, Alia.
All right. I tried to ask you to unmute there.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. And I would like to mention or share rather the word at least, or rather word expression at least. I hate it. You all probably aware of that. At least you and at least it's better than, and then it goes and goes, and you feel it's wrong, but you don't really. At least then I couldn't even find anything to answer. Sort of, like, should I swear at you or should I smile? That really makes my blood boil.
Thank you, Aaliyah, for sharing that one. Yeah, I agree. Like, I don't think anything good ever comes after at least. At least they lived a long life. At least you have other children. At least, and I think, I really do appreciate you bringing that one up. I think people feel compelled to say something, right? Yeah. And this is one of our societal things that we don't, oftentimes we don't know how just to sit and just be with the discomfort, or say, I wish I knew something to say, but I don't. Can I just give you a hug or sit with you? But yeah, at least I think that's such a good, I'm glad you pointed it out. And if you're one of those people who has said at least over the years, we are employing self-compassion here. There is no beating yourself up over it. This is just a recognition that, okay, I could hear this in a different way and understand why that might not be helpful.
People in the chat are appreciating that she's brought this topic up. And then they're saying some things that they've heard, like, don't cry, he's in a better place. You know, when she was sick, she's now in a better place. Kind of those comments that can be, as you say, they're meant to be supportive, but many people don't find them supportive.
Yeah.
And Kayla says that we need more empathetic responses in giving care.
Yeah. So before we switch to those more empathetic or supportive responses, I'm curious, are there any other unhelpful ones that anybody wanted to unmute and share?
Sometimes it's better not to say anything.
Okay.
A young person who dies, it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
And it probably comes from people's discomfort.
Okay.
Someone said these are trite comments.
Yeah. And these are things that we've heard, right? Like we've heard, we've absorbed them. We think it's what we're supposed to say. We haven't been, like, other things haven't been modeled. It's all we know.
Oh, I understand how you feel.
That's a big one. The understand. Yeah, usually that doesn't hit a good place, right? I think most people, when they hear that, feel like, how could you understand? You're not in my shoes. You're not living my experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for sharing those.
At the reception after my mother's funeral, somebody said to me, I'm just losing this. Somebody said to me, I know they wanted to take my mind off, but they said, never be able to forget. They said something to me that I will never be able to forget.
I think it cut off on your chat there a little bit, Ruth.
Oh.
The thing the person said was, now you'll be able to help us.
Now you'll be able to help us.
Meaning now you're free of responsibility. Okay.
She could never forget that. Someone saying that to her
Yeah.
at the funeral. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I-
really.
I often hear this. Someone says, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you
Yeah.
for those. Yeah. So this is
A lot
it.
of them.
Yeah. Making assumptions, looking to fill the air, looking to make people feel better. Yeah.
Mhm.
I see there's another comment there that just came in. Hey, what's.
Yeah, it's not helpful when a person tries to comfort you by kind of one-upping you with your grief. Example, when I experienced is worse than what you're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. So trying to make you feel better because they've had a worse experience, which means
Yeah.
yours can't. Why are you feeling so badly? Yours can't be bad. There's worse out there.
I've heard, well, your mother was 92. My mother was only 42.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So the contest, right? Like
Yeah.
who does it worse contests, or the one-upping, as the commenter said, for sure. So yeah, so you've pinpointed like many different things, right? That are meant to feel supportive. People say with the best of intentions.
Mhm.
But yeah, if they feel minimizing, yeah, or they feel like, you know, they're deflecting or focusing on their experience as opposed to meeting you where you're at, right? So this is the whole thing about when we talk about disenfranchised grief too, right? It's people who are not acknowledging, they're not sitting with you, they're not letting you feel what you need to feel. So let's think about some of the supportive things. If we can switch gears a little. So what are some of the things that have really connected when you're experiencing grief? Are there things that stand out that you're like, oh, this person gets it?
Oh, there's a hand. So we can talk too with this one as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't see it.
Oh, it just flashed.
Oh,
and then
maybe it's
they
gone
changed
now.
their mind. There it is.
Was it back?
Nancy raised her hand.
Oh, it's gone again.
Nancy,
If you're having trouble with the hand raising, you can just write in the chat too that you want to be unmuted and we
have
can
a chat.
talk there.
Yeah, it was a quick flash.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see a couple in the chat box that have come in.
Nancy raised her hand.
Okay,
The charm. Yep.
Carl, do you want to do that first, or should we go to the chat box first?
I'll try here, Nancy, if it comes out.
Okay.
Oh, I think we see Nancy.
Yep.
Hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yay, we can hear you. Hi.
Okay, I'm going way back when. I'm 79 now, and this happened when I was 10 years old.
Mm.
Children are so vulnerable to their way of thinking, and they don't rationalize like we do. My dad died when I was 10, and at his funeral, I was strong and supportive with my family. And then at the graveside, when they were putting his body down into the
Mm.
grave, my mother staggered, and that upset me so much. I went and sat in our car, and a former music teacher of mine came over and sat in the car with me.
Oh.
He said, "Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry about your dad, but you know what? I still remember all the good things and what a really super student you were." And I started to laugh. I was the most unsupportive person in my class. I was a terrible person in the music class, and it was so ridiculous I started to laugh. And as I was laughing, I started to cry.
Mm.
And he put his arm around me and he said, "That's what I wanted." And we cried together.
Oh.
Thank you, Nancy. That's beautiful. Yeah. So what I hear in that is he took a risk with humor. Is that?
Yeah.
Right. Appropriate humor. Like, it was just so good for me at that time.
Yeah. And I hear the emotion tonight too, right? Like all these years later,
Yeah.
but the fact that he was there with you in that moment to laugh and then to cry is like such a beautiful thing, right? Just to let the emotions flow and to be present and not to stifle it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, we've got a few people in the chat. Heidi saying that she doesn't say anything, but she just shares their space.
Okay.
Someone
Yeah.
said the phrase, "I'm here for you." How are you holding, as a question, a handshake or a hug.
Okay.
People who hold out their hand or just reach out and say, "I'm here," and they mean it.
Yeah.
A friend just coming to me and saying, "I'm here for you when you are ready to talk. And if you just want somebody to listen." So offering that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing a lot of is presence, right? People just willing to be there. And that's, I think, many of us are working, most of us are working in an area around illness and dying and death. And yeah, like that's so empowering, I think, to hear, that the thing that resonates the most is just being able to be in a space with people with that kind of emotion and that kind of suffering and just be able to be there, right? Takes a lot of pressure off. We don't have to think of the perfect thing to say.
No.
Just
The
really-
Quakers are a silent group that often sit in silence, and they have a phrase with regards to grief that they hold people in the light. They hold them in the light at times of mourning and bereavement.
Yeah, that's really pretty. Thank you, Ruth. Yeah. So any other comments, any other things that felt supportive that people want to share that have come up in the chat box? Okay, so it sounds like we've gone through most of it. So it's the main idea really, again, is being there, being supportive, being willing to hold that space, right? Even if it feels uncomfortable. And I find it interesting, and maybe many of you have this experience too, doing the type of work that you do, is that people are like, "Oh, you must be special," or like, "Oh, that must be so hard." And yeah, I think many of us who are moderately to completely comfortable being with people in their grief we are able to do that, and we love doing that because we recognize that we don't need to solve anything, right? We don't have to figure it out. We don't have to, and this is why we're not going to talk about Wolfelt, Alan Wolfelt, too much. I'm not going to talk about him at all tonight, but I encourage you, if you haven't heard Alan Wolfelt, he's the founder for the Center for Loss and Transition in Colorado. And he has the philosophy of being with people in their grief, that it's called companioning, and he has 11 tenets he talks about in companioning, and it's like journeying in the wilderness with a person, and walking along beside them in their journey of grief. And like, I love the language he uses, and I encourage you, if you haven't seen his work, because that's all that we need to do. We just need to show up and be there, right? Be present, and that's really what people need. Okay, so this is actually Alan Wolfelt's work. I had forgotten we were going to talk about this, but this is not about thing. This is in the vein of supporting others, right? So I sometimes share this with clients I have in my private practice who are grieving and looking for support from the people in their, in their surroundings, either their family or friends or community generally. So Alan Wolfelt says that we typically have these people in our lives, and he uses the acronym DARLN, DRLN. So these different categories of people who we could think about depending on what our needs are in our grief at the moment. So he says the doers are the people who will do for you. They're going to get your groceries, they're going to walk your dog, they're going to put up your Christmas lights, and those are the people that you could count on to get things done. The R's are the relaxers. So they're the people who are just going to sit in space with you and not expect anything of you. You could be 100% yourself. You could relax. You could just be. The L's are the listeners. So they're not looking to problem solve. When you're ready to talk, they are there. They will listen. They will, they're not looking to fix or anything. They're just going to be able to hear what you need to share. And the N's are the negativers. And Alan Wolfelt will say that the negativers are the people who are always, recognizing challenges and barriers, probably where they don't exist. So with the negativers, you have to hold your boundaries firmly, and you have to, let them know, like, when it's not working for you, right? You don't necessarily need to invite the negativers in when you're not feeling in a space to be able to be with that. So boundaries are really important. So I always think that's useful, right? Like, as we're thinking about support from others, or when we are supporting, where do we want to be? Maybe knowing what people need. These are roles. How can we fit in to be able to support other people? Then this question, right? Asking for help when we need help, when other people need help. So this question, would you be willing? Comes from the language of nonviolent communication. So nonviolent communication, it's really nonviolent communication uses empathy to build connection, and it's 4 steps. This is the final step. So I think it's so useful when we're experiencing grief to ask, as a way of asking others for help. I just love the phrasing of it. Would you be willing? Right? So would you be willing to walk the dog? Would you be willing to just come and sit with me? Would you be willing to go for a walk or have a cup of tea? So just, and what I like about it is it's an invitation for people to either say, yes, I'm in a place to do that, or I'd like to, but I'm not able to. It's just a compassionate way to phrase it, really. So as we're thinking about supporting others, a few things to keep in mind, a few things for consideration. And the first is that we need to be in a place ourselves where we can offer support, right? So if we go back, to the earlier part of this presentation, thinking about our own grief, if we're working in an environment where we're experiencing grief, we might be somewhere in those 12 different stages of burnout, or we might just be feeling overwhelmed in that moment, that day. We might be feeling we're having a tough time and we're just barely keeping it together. So before we answer that question, would you be willing? Maybe doing a quick check-in with ourselves, that mindful moment. Am I in a place to be able to offer support? What can I hold? Where am I at? You know, and do we have the capacity to be able to connect with others and be there for them at this time? So super important. And it's okay if you're not, right? It's okay to not be there in that moment. And you could tell your friend or your colleague, I really do want to be there for you, but I need to do this for myself first, and I'll let you know as soon as I can. When we do choose to be present for others, this is Dan Siegel's work, right? So I talked about Dan Siegel earlier with the emotions. He has this acronym PART, and he says this is a way that when we are with others, a bit of a framework we could use to make sure that we're there in a way that feels supportive. So he says the first is to be aware of our own presence, right? So our presence is, how are we showing up? You know, are we showing up in a way that that demonstrates or feels open and accepting and curious and loving towards people? Or are we showing up like closed and shut down or overwhelmed? Or are we like caught up in our own stories, chatting away like crazy? So our presence, to be aware of what it is that we're showing up with. He says the next part is attunement, is so how we focus on the internal state of the other person. So I really think about that in terms of their energy, right? So when I sit down with someone, just noticing what their energy is telling me. The resonance is how we adjust our internal state, right, to meet them. So it's like, that's the piece where we're meeting them where they're at, right? So we feel their energy, we adjust our energy, and then we are there, we are present, we are in relationship. Dan Siegel says if we could do those three things well, we can establish trust. And that's what we want, right? If we're going to support people who are experiencing grief, if people are supporting us in our grief, what we really need is to feel that trust. So Dan Siegel will say that the me and the we become a we become one. It is a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship where, where we are just moving and flowing together, which I think is really lovely, right? And that is also reflective of really what you all shared when I said, like, what is supportive? You all shared, like, showing up and being there and offering to sit or maybe hold your hand. Like it didn't come down to the perfect language. It came down to being. So here is a nice framework. And sometimes we'll check in with ourselves. Sometimes we're supporting people where their grief triggers our grief, right? That happens, and that's okay. But do we have a mechanism to be able to check in with ourselves? And I think this is a good one, right? Check in with ourselves, adjust our energy. Maybe we go off to thinking, what's the perfect thing to say? Wow, like that's so difficult. How do we fix the situation? And then pulling ourselves back, right? Pulling ourselves back to get into this place. Okay. So this is just a short video. This was the work of Megan Devine. I mentioned her name quickly earlier. She wrote a really lovely, easy to read book. Well, for grief book, it's an easy to read book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. So we're just going to show this short video.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, the human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is. He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. I mean, we try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
Okay. So yeah, just a lovely little video that I often share, just a great reminder. And again, very much in line with a lot of the comments that are here today. So this is just the last slide that I wanted to share with you. In the middle, you'll see a 1-page handout that we put together called Honoring Grief. It was a resource that we put together for long-term care homes during the pandemic. Which I think is still quite relevant. I think we adjusted it a little bit to take out the COVID specific. I think there were a couple of COVID numbers. So if anybody's interested, I believe it's on our website. If not, you could definitely ask me or Carl for it. We are happy to share it. And then just a couple of quotes, right? The only cure for grief is to grieve, right? So very much in line with that short video we just saw. There are no easy fixes. There's no magic pills. There's no specific timeline. But just going through the experience of grieving itself is what's going to start to help us integrate, you know, everything that is happening. And then just another little quote that I liked: embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. Right. And sometimes we don't know that when we're in the middle of it. Sometimes we don't feel that. But it's there. It's there. And I'm curious, you know, there may, if some people, maybe that doesn't resonate for everyone. And I think sometimes when we're in our grief again, it's hard to really think about like the, you know, the takeaways or the growth that we got from it. But I put it there for consideration, right? If that's something that might feel helpful or supportive.
Tara, someone's asking the question, how can I tell my colleagues if I'm struggling or grieving?
Great question. So what I would suggest is like maybe going back to that language of would you be willing, right? So it's a radical act of courage, right? And what I believe and what I have learned from doing this work the last 6 years is that people are not alone in these experiences. You know, so the more that we have people who feel brave and courageous to show their hearts and bring these conversations into the forefront, the more we create cultures, healthcare cultures, where this is, you know, where this becomes part of the practice and we're able to care for each other. So asking that question, would you be willing? Like being bold and brave. I'm struggling. I'm experiencing grief. Would you be willing to? Right? And checking in. I hope that is helpful. Yeah.
Someone just appreciated that you said that with regards to a safe culture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the hope, right? Because like it makes me think like, you know, in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of talk, you know, about being professional and leaving your feelings at the door. I think when I did like my undergrad back in the that was some of the language, right? You got to check your feelings at the door. Not the case. There's many years of research now that proves that does not work. So yeah, building up our cultures, our organizational cultures that are kind, compassionate, supportive, it really fosters, again, that sense of safety and well-being, which is what we're looking for. We're bringing our whole humanity to work, so let's take care of it. How are we doing for time? It's 8:24. Carl, I see you're here. Do we need to wrap up?
No, we got 6 more minutes.
Okay. So if there are any questions.
Yeah, well, there's a comment here. Sometimes support comes from unexpected people, and those you think can count on are not able to support you. And it just flipped on me. Are not able to support you. I think you are right. Just keep asking.
Okay. Yes. Appreciate that. Yeah. So just continuing to be bold and brave and courageous. Okay.
And Janet says, here's my story. I married a man who had just survived the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. He had lost a wife and children during this war. He had never ceased to grieve for his lost family. People often tell him to stop grieving because he has a family now. To which he replies, I'm going to scroll down, sorry guys. To which he replies,
That is
Yeah.
that his current family cannot replace the one he lost.
Mhm.
It's a courageous comment.
Mhm.
And my children would not understand why he acts this way. He does.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Right. And yeah, I think that's such like an example of grief exists, right? Just because, and like to me, that sort of brings up equanimity a little bit, this idea that we could hold joy and suffering simultaneously, right? We might have this experience of more family, more children, but it doesn't take away the experience of loss and suffering that also exists. And we could hold these things together. And I think often in grief, we see a lot of that, right? As, you know, I often have people share with me, like, especially after somebody has died, when they start to feel some of the, you know, emotions they like to feel again, like happiness or excitement or love, the guilt that they feel because that feels like they're letting go of the person or the people that have died. And I wonder if maybe, you know, like, yeah, if that's helpful, right? This idea that you could hold both, you could feel both, and maybe that's the way you could explain it. Yeah, so and they have a better understanding of the situation.
So Jeanette,
you know,
her
so
next comment with regards to her story is, so I wrote a book
okay.
so that my children could grasp it.
I love it. That's fantastic. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so before we go, I was hoping one last quick exercise. It's a wrap-up ritual. It's something we used to do in our mindfulness-informed end-of-life care, is that if we could dedicate the meaning or the merit of this time we spent together reflecting on grief and grieving and loss and dying, if there is someone or something that comes to mind that you want to dedicate the meaning of the time together to, as a way of sort of grounding ourselves again in this moment, please feel free, either on your own, just to, you know, to spend a moment reflecting on that person, or to please share it if that feels good to you. We would appreciate that too.
My dad. My mom and my dad. My mentor, Guy. Donna, a good friend who died recently, and I miss her every day. My mom. My sister, who was my best friend. My mom. My dad, Janet said, and she's also let us know about her book. It's all available on Amazon. It's a beautiful ray of sunshine. So you can check out Janet's book that she wrote for Hope for the Rwanda Genocide Survivor by Janet. My niece, my dad, my mom-in-law. My sister-in-law, my nieces. Someone says, is there an appropriate prayer? ? My mom.
Yeah, thank you. And as everyone, if people are just finishing
Thank
sharing,
you.
I don't know about an appropriate prayer. I think everybody has things that resonate with them. What I tend to do, and you probably noticed throughout the presentation, my hands tend to come to my heart a lot. It's an exercise called Hands on Heart. It's a self-compassion exercise. It feels really nourishing to me. So often as I'm reflecting on people that I've cared for who have died, or people I know who are grieving right now, as I'm thinking about it, you know, and yes, Leah just shared, you know, all the people who've died in Turkey and Syria this week with the earthquake. Yeah, sometimes this feels really nourishing to me. So it could be a prayer. It could be this, you know, emotion that feels supportive. You know, sometimes I say to myself something that I feel like I need in the moment. May I feel calm, may I feel ease. You know, taking a couple of moments, you know, sometimes if you leave your hands here for 20 seconds or more, the body releases oxytocin, which feels really nourishing too. So yeah, just caring for yourself. And I think it's really important after we do a session like this and we're vulnerable and we share and we reflect, taking these few moments, right, to think about why we do this work and how we care for ourselves and others, and making sure that we care for ourselves tonight. So I thank you all. I know our time together is up for now, but thank you for being here. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Carl, and everyone for your participation.
Thank you, Tara.